I'm Stephen Baldwin. I am second.
If you go to the website, I Am Second, there's a whole bunch of stories of people like Stephen Baldwin, Bethany Hamilton, world-renowned surfer, Tony Dungy, and some others. And it's just great to hear some stories from some people that you might know or might have heard of, just about how they came to encounter the Christ that we talk about. I Am Second is the name of the website. So my wife and I just got back from Dubai. Dubai is an Arab country, a moderate Arab country, on the shore of what's called the Persian Gulf or the Arab Gulf, depending upon who's naming it. It's a stone's throw, if you can throw a good stone, from Iran. So it's not far away from Iran. It's a moderate Arab country that determined a number of years ago that they were going to run out of oil. And so they determined that they had to do something to prevent the consequences of running out of money. And so they decided to build a modern financial, trade, economic, tourist center. And they have given themselves, for the last dozen years or so, to the task of building the city. Here's an example of the kinds of things they have built. This is known as the Palm. It is a series of islands and peninsula that comes out from the coast of Dubai, and people live on that. It was created by knocking a mountain down and putting it in the ocean and building these islands, and people live on the Palm there. Those are houses and residences and hotels and all kinds of fabulous things that they've put out there. This is one of the hotels that is not far distance from the Palm, another one of their fancy hotels. Here's a driver that took us on this little trek through the desert we went through. It was sort of a roller coaster on sand experience, in which you got to get in this Toyota Land Rover and go up and down, and then get out and throw up, and then watch a belly dancer. So we did that one night. This is a picture of a mall. This is a kind of shopping malls that they have developed there in Dubai, and these are the kinds of things that we looked at but did not buy. They're in Dubai. Here's a picture from my brother's office. My brother flies for Emirates Air, and he's a trainer for Emirates Air and an examiner of the pilots. And he goes out of his office, and this is the kinds of thing. Now, you have to picture this. A few years ago, this was all desert. And this is what they have created. And you can see some cranes in the background. At one point, perhaps a year or so ago, Dubai had more cranes than any place in the world, sort of per capita. It was like the crane capital of the world because they're building like crazy there in Dubai. Here's a picture of the Hotel Atlantis, which is on the edge of the Palm that they've created. Here's another kind of cool hotel that I took a picture of. Here's a marina, and you can see that building that's kind of twisting in the middle. So they're building all these buildings, but none of them are really the same architecturally. It's just phenomenal, the kinds of different structures that they're coming up with. And did I tell you they have a lot of cranes in Dubai? Yeah, there's a picture of a number of cranes there. They're still yet unfinished. A number of years ago, well, my brother lives in a 40-story apartment building, very similar to those buildings that you see there, and about a mile from this particular location. And my brother looked out and said, "You see all these buildings around here?" And he pointed to, like a dozen or so apartment buildings, large 40-story, 50-story buildings. And he said, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, none of these were here. When I came to think about this location, I looked out and it was all sand. And this is just what they have done. So it's pretty phenomenal. When you go to a place like that, you stop and examine your life. And you say, I haven't really given myself to pursue things like Dubai. I haven't given my life to pursue the kinds of things that they're showcasing here. I've tried to pursue other things in my life. And you stop, maybe at 50 years of age, and you examine your life and say, am I really happy with the decisions I've made? Maybe you're 20 years of age, and you have to think about your life, and you have to decide, what is it that you're going to pursue with your life? What are you going to give your life to? You've got one life, and what are you going to pursue? And so I went through some sort of time of reflection, thinking, did I make the right choices? Am I making the right choices? Am I good with where my life is going and what I'm doing with my life? You ever think about that? Hold that thought, and maybe we'll get back to it if I can remember. John chapter 20, John tells us the reason why he wrote the book of John. He says, I want you to know that there are many miraculous things that Jesus did that aren't recorded in this book. But these things are written. The miracles that I have recorded, I have written so that you might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. And that by believing, you might have life in his name. So John is the one book in the New Testament that has a very clear purpose for which he's written it. John says, I wrote this book so that you could read it and that you could see some of the things that Jesus did, and upon seeing them that you might believe in him, and believing in him that you might have life, that you might come to have life in his name. And so John has seven miracles that he records that Jesus did. And he very carefully records these miracles, and then he tells us some of the teachings that surrounded the miracles. It's like Jesus does something, and then John teaches about it. Or John teaches about it, and then Jesus does it, in order to verify who Jesus is. For example, he changes the water into wine. And this is a good verification of the teaching that he just had, that he's the king of Israel, because the king is the one who provides the wine. So Jesus demonstrates that he's the king of Israel by providing the wine for the wedding, showing who he is. Or in chapter 5, Jesus demonstrates his power by healing this man who's lame for 38 years. And he demonstrates that he is one with the Father. Because they say, this is on the Sabbath and you shouldn't do it. And he says, yes, but I am always working, and my Father is always working, and I am one with the Father. He makes this declaration to be with God. Or the miracle in John chapter 6 where he multiplies the fishes and the loaves. And he has a very clear teaching, I am the bread of life. And I'm going to prove the bread of life, that I am the bread of life, by multiplying the fishes and loaves. And in John chapter 9, he heals this man who's been born blind from birth. And Jesus heals him, and he teaches that I am the light of the world. This is who I am, and the miracles that I do prove who I am. Now in John chapter 11, we get to the seventh miracle. And for those of you who have read the Bible a lot, you know that the number 7 is sort of a culminating number. It's sort of a number of culmination, and a number of that's supposed to sort of stand out and say this is a number of completion. And so John is giving us, this is a number that shows the seventh miracle, the completion of the work of God. I want to teach you this so that you can see sort of the culmination of the miracles of God. And John chapter 11 teaches us this final miracle. Now a man named Lazarus was sick, and he was from Bethany, the village of Mary and Martha. And you remember Mary and Martha, don't you? From your reading the Bible. A couple of gals that Jesus loved big time and had a good relationship with, and Lazarus, a young man that he knew, and the text says he loved as well. Now this Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So Mary's the perfume gal, who poured the perfume on the feet of Jesus, and that's who she is. Now, in 1873, a French archaeologist by the name of Charles Clermont-Gounod. You've heard of him? Most of you have a good repertoire of French archaeologists that you know? No, huh? Okay, this French archaeologist by the name of Charles Clermont-Gounod discovered, he was rummaging around Bethany, which is where Mary and Martha and Lazarus were from, and he discovered a cave with a bunch of ossuaries in it. You guys know what ossuaries are? Well, in that day when you died, they would put you in a cave, and they would lay you down and let your body sort of decay, the flesh decay, and then when it was just bones that were left, they would gather up your bones in order to get the cave ready for the next person, and they would put those bones in an ossuary, which was a stone box. So an ossuary is basically a bone box. Well, in 1873, Charles Clermont-Gounod was investigating and searching around the area of Bethany, which is where Mary and Martha and Lazarus were from, and he discovered this cave filled with ossuaries, bone boxes. And he discovered on this cave some inscriptions that made it clear that this was a Christian cave. This was a cave filled with bone boxes of people who were Christians. And a number of the ossuaries themselves had little crosses on them. And an ossuary actually had a name on it. So you, instead of buying a tombstone, you'd buy a bone box and say, put my bones in this box, and you put your name on it. And so he read the names on the bone boxes. Now this is near Bethany, and did I say that's where Mary and Martha and Lazarus are from? And as he's reading the names of the bone boxes in this ossuary, this cave filled with ossuaries about a mile away from Bethany, he discovered the name Mary, and he discovered the name Martha, and he discovered the name Lazarus. So the very characters of John 11 that we're about to read about, we have at least somebody with those same names in their bones, right in a cave near their hometown. Isn't that amazing? That is like, wow. Like, is that the Mary and the Martha and the Lazarus of John 11? I don't know. But it very well could be. In fact, there's something else that they found in the cave. They found some coins. Here's an example of the kind of coin they found. And they're from the coin, they're inscripted with this, Governor Varius Gratus, from 15 or 16 AD. So that gets us. This is 15 or 16 years after the resurrection of Christ. This coin was minted, and it was put in the ossuaries, or put in the cave where these ossuaries are found. So in other words, we know, have a pretty good idea that this series of ossuaries, this cave filled with bone boxes, was created and filled with bone boxes around, midway through the first century. So we're talking about before the Gospel of John was actually written. So before the Gospel of John was written, they created this cave and put in it the bones of Mary and Martha and Lazarus, so that 1,800 years later we could discover it and go, whoa, I thought the New Testament was a myth. Maybe not. I don't know. So the sister sent word to Jesus, Lord, the one you love is sick. I find that fascinating because the one you love is a reference in the Gospel of John also to the writer John, to the Apostle John. So it's almost like Jesus loved the Apostle John and Jesus loved Lazarus. And I wonder if everybody walked around and said, hey, I am the one Jesus loves. Just a thought, I don't know. So when he heard this, Jesus said, this sickness will not end in death. No, it's for God's glory, so that God's Son might be glorified through it. And Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. Yet when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. Then he said to his disciples, let us go back to Judea. I'll show you where they are in a minute. But Rabbi, they said, a short while ago the Jews were trying to stone you, and yet you're going back? Not a good plan. And Jesus said, Lazarus is dead, and for your sake, I'm glad I was not there so that you might believe, but let us go to him. So I'm going to do something that's going to bring me glory that you might believe. I'm going to do something cool. Then Thomas, called Didymus, who hasn't really gotten the big picture of what's going on here, said, let us go also that we might die with him. So he's thinking, they're all going to die. Let's go back to Jerusalem. So where are they? Well, they are at the Green Star. You see the Green Star, that's the place where John the Baptist had baptized. And they are there. They're about a 4-day walk away from Bethany. Bethany is where Mary and Martha and the cave filled with ossuaries is. And Jesus is like, okay, Lazarus is sick. Let's wait 2 days. He gets a satellite message, apparently from God, that Lazarus has died. He makes a determination, let's now go back to Bethany. It's a 4-day walk to Bethany. By the time he gets to Bethany, Lazarus has been in the grave for 4 days. The disciples are worried about going to Bethany because right near Bethany is that big red star, and that big red star is Jerusalem. And they're thinking, we go to Jerusalem, who knows who's going to come after us? The Jews are trying to take you out, Jesus, so let's not go near there. But Jesus does so anyway. Let's see what happens.
When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had been buried 4 days before. Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Judeans had come to see Martha and Mary to comfort them about their brother's death. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed in the house.
If you had been here, Lord, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now, God will give you whatever you ask him for.
Your brother will rise to life.
I know that he will rise to life on the last day.
I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me will live, even though they die. And those who live and believe in me will never die. Do you believe this?
Yes, Lord. I do believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is to come into the world.
After Martha said this, she went back and called her sister Mary privately.
The teacher's here and is asking for you.
When Mary heard this, she got up and hurried out to meet him. Jesus had not yet arrived in the village, but was still in the place where Martha had met him. The people who were in the house with Mary, comforting her, followed her when they saw her get up and hurry out. They thought that she was going to the grave to weep there. Mary arrived where Jesus was, and as soon as she saw him, she fell at his feet.
Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died.
Jesus saw her weeping, and he saw how the people with her were weeping also. His heart was touched, and he was deeply moved.
Where have you buried him?
Come and see, Lord.
Jesus wept. See how much he loved him, the people.
Just let's stop there for a minute. I want to talk about this just for a minute. That's the shortest verse in the Bible, is those little words, Jesus wept. And what's so fascinating about it is the word refers to not a loud lamenting. Oftentimes in that day when someone would die, the neighbors would come, and it was kind of their responsibility to sort of loudly wail and lament, like, oh, that kind of thing, when someone died. But Jesus wept, and the word refers to an authentic, sort of weeping and crying. And Jesus is so moved by this moment that the text says he weeps. Now, people have asked the question, well, why is he weeping? Those who were there thought he's weeping because he loved Lazarus and he misses Lazarus. But I don't think that's exactly it, because he's going to raise Lazarus from the dead, as most of you know. So why is he weeping? Well, the text says that he saw Martha and Mary and saw their pain, and he wept. And what strikes me about this is how authentic and how compassionate and real he is. I don't know about you, but in my experience, most of us have been taught to be tough and strong and not real connected to kind of our emotional life. That's just kind of the way we grew up, and that's kind of been reinforced just by life. When my dad died, one of my brothers was walking down the stairs in our house, and another brother was walking up the stairs in our house, and the one walking up was crying. He was crying because he just heard that he lost his father. And the one walking down said, "Don't cry, your dad's in heaven." Talk about theological abuse. Taking theology and beating somebody up with it. Don't cry, your dad's in heaven. And we haven't learned, a lot of us haven't learned, that tears are God's vehicle for helping us to be emotionally healthy. And an emotionally healthy way to respond is to cry very often. And Jesus does this even though he knows Lazarus is going to be raised. He cries because he sees the pain of Mary and Martha. Paul put it this way in Romans chapter 12, verse 15. He says, "Weep with those who weep and rejoice with those who rejoice." So in other words, when you see somebody who's in deep pain, if you're an emotionally healthy, compassionately connected person, you will see their pain and you will feel their pain. And you feel their pain and you will weep as they weep. Just because of their pain. Now, a lot of us are sort of emotionally unhealthy enough and detached enough from feelings and from compassion that we have a hard time sort of doing that. But it's my prayer for us that God would make us a little more tender and a little more compassionate and a little more just willing and able to express ourselves feeling-wise, that we would actually feel deeper the pain of other people. And we'd have the freedom. We wouldn't be so worried about what other people think that we're afraid to just cry and weep. That's not easy for us to do, but that's really what fully emotionally alive, compassionate, connected human beings do. So we're in progress, right? We're in process, right? We're growing, right? That's good. And I know when my brother took his life, my mom tells me, she says, one of the persons she saw was Chuck Tompkins, who was one of the pastors here, and he's a big, tall guy, and my mom's kind of short, and Chuck came and just kind of put his arms around her and wrapped her up, and she was crying at the death of her son, and Chuck just started weeping right along with her, and she just kind of remembered that as being a moment where she felt the compassion of another person who had the courage just to cry with her. Pretty cool. I want you to see the rest of this.
He gave sight to the blind man, didn't he? Could he not have kept Lazarus from dying? Deeply moved once more, Jesus went to the tomb, which was a cave with a stone placed at the entrance.
Take the stone away.
There will be a bad smell, Lord. He has been buried 4 days.
Didn't I tell you that you would see God's glory if you believed?
They took the stone away. Jesus looked up.
I thank you, Father, that you listen to me. I know that you always listen to me. But I say this for the sake of the people here, so that they will believe that you sent me.
After he had said this, he called out in a loud voice,
Lazarus! Come out!
He came out. His hands and feet wrapped in grave clothes, and with a cloth round his face.
Untie him and let him go.
Many of the people who had come to visit Mary saw what Jesus did, and they believed in him.
So this is the culminating miracle of the teaching of John, the culminating miracle really of the life of Jesus until the resurrection, when he raises Lazarus from the dead. And many of the people who saw this believed and put their faith in him, and even those who saw it went back to the Jewish leaders in Jerusalem and told them. And they thought, oh no, if we let him go on like this, everybody will believe in him. And the Romans will come and take our place away and our nation away. So from that day on, the Roman authority, or the Jewish authorities, made a decision to plot to kill Jesus. They determined to plot against him because of the wonders of this miracle. Now, in this miracle, there's a teaching that Jesus gives about who he is and what he provides. And this teaching is verified by the miracle. And the miracle substantiates the teaching. So this is the teaching. It's in Romans 11, 25, 26, and 27. I want you to see, John 11, 25, 26, 27. This is what he says. He says it to Martha, and you saw it on the video. I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he may die, he shall live. And whoever lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? Yes, Lord, Martha said. I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who was to come into the world. That little phrase, the Christ, the Son of God, that's underlined, is only found here and one other place in the New Testament. It's found in John 20 when John writes about the reason for his writing this book. You catch that? I am the Christ. You are the Christ, the Son of the God. John 20, John said, these miracles I have written that you might believe that Jesus is the what? The Christ, the Son of God. That phrase is only used here and it's used in John 11. And John is using this phrase in these two places in order to communicate, this is why I've written the book, that you might know that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. And here we have an episode where Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead. And in the midst of this, Martha, Mary, and the disciples, they get it. They understand who he is. He is the Christ, the Son of the living God. Now, let's take a few minutes and kind of pick this saying apart a little bit so that we can fully understand what it means. He says, I am the resurrection. I am the one who provides resurrection. I am the one who gives resurrection. And even though someone might die temporally in this world, he shall live eternally, the one who believes in me, because I'm the resurrection. Furthermore, I'm the life. And anyone who lives now temporally and believes in me shall live eternally. They shall never die, because I'm the life. I provide resurrection. I provide life. I am the resurrection and the life. He says it, or we can say it a little bit differently. I am the resurrection and the life. Jesus is claiming to be the giver of life. He's the one who gives life. And then he says, he who believes in me, though he may die, he shall live. And whoever lives and believes in me shall never die. I am the giver of life, and I give life to those who believe in me. The claim of Jesus that he makes as he does these miracles is that I am the giver of life, and that I give life to those who believe in me. And then he looks at Martha, and says, do you believe this? Do you believe this? Believe what? Well, believe that I'm the giver of life, and that I give life to those who believe in me. Do you believe this? Jesus is making a claim about himself. You may agree with this claim, you may disagree with this claim, you may like this claim, you may not like this claim. The claim about Jesus is that I am the giver of life, and I give life to those who believe in me. And he looks at Martha and says, do you believe this? I oftentimes talk about the first question God's going to ask us when we stand before him, when we die, and the first question God's going to ask us is essentially this: do you believe this? Let me say it differently. The first question God's going to ask you is the question, why should I let you into my space? Why should I let you into heaven? On what basis should you be forgiven? It's essentially this same question. Do you believe this? Do you believe that I'm the giver of life and that I give life to those who come to me? Now, Martha gave an interesting answer. She says, yes! She doesn't say, I don't know, I got to think about it. Although it certainly is something that someone should think about. But she says, yes. She doesn't say, I'm not sure what I believe. She doesn't say, well, it depends what you mean by the word believe. Hey, folks, you ever been to Burger King? You go where they display there's a little speaker there where they display all the things that you can buy at the drive-in, and you say, I would like a Whopper and fries. And then what do they say? Go to the first window. And you go to the first window, and they say, what? You guys don't go to Burger King much, do you? What are you, Subway people or what? $7. Give us your $7. Give us your $5. If you got the meal, $7, whatever. Give us your money. And you, having ordered a Whopper and fries, hand over your money. Why? Because you believe that by the time you get to the second window, they're going to give you a Whopper and fries. You see, you believe all the time. Believing is something you do every day. Believing is something you do every time you sit in a chair without checking it to see if it's steady. Believing is something you do all the time. And Jesus says, I am the giver of life, and I give life to those who believe me for it. Do you believe this? Don't tell me you don't know what it means to believe. Do you believe this? And Martha goes, yes. Yes. Now, I sit with people who come to our church from time to time. I do that a lot, but from time to time I ask the question, if you were to die today and stand before God, and God said, why should I let you into heaven? What would you say? And sometimes people say things like this, I'm doing the best I can. I'm like, really? Is that what we've been talking about? Is that what I say? You're counting on you're doing the best you can? It ain't that good. First off, you don't really do the best you can. You screw up a lot. You don't really do the best you can. And second off, the best you can, I mean, it's okay. But we're talking like heaven here. We're talking eternity with God here. The best you can is all you got? You see, what Jesus is teaching here is that he is the giver of life, and he gives life to those who believe him. And then he confronts us, do you believe this? It's not about your good looks, although some of you are really looking good today. It's not about your wisdom. It's not about your church faithfulness. It's not about the money you give or you might not give. It's not about caring, for the poor. In other words, your place in eternity and your security of forgiveness is not about anything you do, although you might do all kinds of great things. It is primarily and solely about, do you believe that Jesus Christ is the giver of life and that he gives life to those who believe him for it? That's the teaching of Jesus. And this repeated teaching is taught to us over and over and over again in the Gospel of John. And I just want to barrage you with a number of verses where John says this again and again and again. For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whosoever believes in him shall not perish but will have everlasting life. And whoever drinks of the water that I give him will never thirst, but the water I give him will become in him a fountain of water springing up to everlasting life. And most assuredly, I want you to know this. Most assuredly, I want you to know this. I say to you that whoever hears my word and believes in him who sent me currently has, right now, everlasting life, has a connection with God right now, and shall not in the future come into judgment, and has already passed from death into life. And I am the bread of life, and he who comes to me shall never hunger, and he who believes in me shall never be thirsty. And it is my Father's will that everyone who looks to the Son and believes in him shall have, at this point, eternal life. And I will raise him up on the last day. And if the English language means anything, then what Jesus is saying is you can have quiet confidence, you can have absolute assurance as to where you're going to spend eternity, because I am the giver of life, and I give it to those people who believe me for it. And do you believe this? If you do, you got it. What are you going to do with your life? Now, there's a fallacy. There's a fallacy of the big thing. The fallacy of the big thing is, I have to find something really big to do with my life. And I get why you feel that way, because around here we have some people who are doing some really big things with their life. We have some people who are committing their lives in some very profound and deep ways to do some really big things, sometimes bringing people into their homes, sometimes going some places, sometimes moving where they live, to do some big things with their life. And the fallacy of the big thing is that unless I figure out the big thing, I don't know what to do. And the reality is, what God calls us to do is to do the little things. To be faithful with our finances. To be faithful with our anger and forgiveness. To be faithful to get up in the morning and read the scriptures and hear what God has to say and just obey him that day. To be faithful to gather in groups together and just love the people around you. To be faithful to the little things is what God calls us to do. And then over time, if God wants to give us what we might consider to be some big thing, that's great. But be faithful to little things. Did I tell you there are a lot of cranes in Dubai? Most of them are not working anymore. Turns out Dubai ran into a cash crunch. They had to borrow $10 billion from Abu Dhabi. Most of the cranes that I saw are not moving anymore. Most of the buildings that they've started to build but haven't finished, well, they're just kind of leaving them there. And those big buildings that they've built, some of them are being used. But very often I'd say to my brother, what are they doing there? Oh, that one's empty. And that one's empty. And that one's empty. And that one back there's empty. You have a choice. You can live for Dubai, or you can believe the promise of God. That He has life for you. And you can prepare your life for life with Him. Just by doing the small things. Just by singing while you clean a house. Someone asked me what the favorite thing I did in Dubai was. And I gave kind of a quick response without thinking about it. And I said, seeing my brother. Seeing my brother. Now, I'm not going to get into all my family dysfunction right now because we don't have time. Another day, perhaps. But I said to my wife, you know, this is the first time I ever felt valued by my brother. Like I'm 54, he's 60. This is the first time I've ever felt valued by my brother. And that was the best thing that happened in the trip. Weird, isn't it? How the things that we think are important really aren't that important. And the money we pursue, and the stuff we want to get, and the recognition we desire, all that stuff that we think is such a big deal, it's not. What's really important is loving the people that are in our world, demonstrating that love to others, experiencing that love from them, just being faithful to God. Cool. Father, thank you so much.